It is my distinct pleasure to now introduce the first and only panel at GEOINT Foreword. This panel focuses on leveraging a next-gen approach with GEOINT for hazards. The GEOINT community has always played a vital role in crisis response around the world. With extreme weather events becoming more frequent and severe, advancements in technology are critical for prediction, mitigation, and response. This panel will explore emerging GEOINT technologies and business models that enhance resilience and accelerate decision quality data delivery. Moderating this panel will be Chris Anthony, former Chief Deputy Director at CAL FIRE. Chris served California as a governor appointee overseeing CAL FIRE's fire protection, resource management, support, and administrative functions as the Chief Deputy Director. During this appointment, he worked with tribal, local, state, federal, nonprofit, and private entities to ensure efficient implementation and coordination of investments made by the administration to address the increasing size, severity, and scope of wildfire impacts in California. So clearly he's the real deal, the best person to moderate this amazing panel. But joining Chris are several amazing colleagues. Brian Collins, Executive Director at Earth Fire Alliance, Madison Creeden, Director of Business Development at ICEYE US, as well as Jonny Dyer, Co-founder and Chief Executive Officer of Muon Space. Please join me in welcoming Chris and the panel.
Thank you, Jeff, for that introduction. I really appreciate it. Good morning. For starters, I would just like to say what an incredible honor it is to be here at the 2025 GEOINT Symposium, to be able to moderate this panel, and to be here with this audience of academics and researchers, professionals, defense stakeholders. I hope that during this short time together, that one, I represent the fire service community well, and that two, we discover opportunities to align efforts and develop durable relationships. And three, that we walk away with a much better understanding of how the GEOINT community plays a vital role in all hazards emergency response with emerging geospatial technologies that will actually enhance resilience and accelerate decision-making for the first responders that are on the ground. So as Jeff mentioned, my name is Chris Anthony, where I worked in my career with CAL FIRE. My final position was as the Chief Deputy Director of the department. And simply for reference, CAL FIRE is the state of California's fire and forestry agency with over 12,000 women and men who are responding to all hazard emergency response across 31 million acres in the state responsibility areas of California, but also providing full fire service response capabilities in many of the counties and cities in California as well. Following my career with CAL FIRE, there were really four focus areas that I wanted to spend my time on, and I think geospatial intelligence actually plays a role in each and every one of them. The first is, how do we return good fire into our fire-adapted ecosystems? And I'll actually talk just a little bit more about that later on. The second was community wildfire preparedness and resilience, and really, what actions do we need to take to prepare and protect our communities from the impacts of fire? The third is the policy and legislation framework that goes around that. And then lastly, how do we connect innovation and technology to the fire service and the wildfire community to solve some of our biggest challenges? I truly believe that innovation and technology has a massive potential to accelerate our work and innovate our industry. Over the course of my career, I have witnessed a significant increase in the intensity, the size, the severity, and the complexity of wildfire. And it's not just wildfire that I'm talking about, it's urban fire as well, because a wildfire really ceases to be a wildfire once it enters into the built environment and is primarily driven by structure-to-structure fire spread. So before I dive in, I'd like to set a little context. CAL FIRE maintains records dating all the way back to 1932. And in just the last 8 years in California, we have had 14 out of 20 of our most destructive fires, 13 out of 20 of our largest fires, and 9 out of 20 of our most deadly fires. And I like to say these are not the kinds of records that you want to break. And this is in a state that is likely the most well-resourced state when it comes to local, state, and federal firefighting resources. Everything from engines to hand crews to bulldozers to aircraft to the sheer number of firefighters that we have in the state. Additionally, the economic costs of emergency response in California are skyrocketing. Back in the 1980s, we would spend about, in the tens of millions of dollars on emergency fire suppression, and these are costs above and beyond just our base budget. Today, that's nearing nearly $1 billion a year in emergency fire suppression costs above and beyond what we're budgeted for in our base budget. It is also estimated that the economic costs of wildfires in the United States alone are reaching levels never seen before, up to $893 billion annually. And globally, we're now burning 390 million hectares, or over 960 million acres a year. So this is not merely a California problem or a Western States problem or a national problem. It is global in scale. The past 10 years has seen a rise in large fire events on multiple continents. Globally, governments are spending record amounts on firefighting and disaster response. The scale of evacuations and relocations are reaching new levels, and I personally believe that not only are we on the tipping point of significant economic impacts, we're also looking at a humanitarian crisis. You don't lose 16,000 homes in Southern California over an 8 or 12-hour period and not have significant humanitarian impacts. And lastly, wildfires and urban fires are costing insurers tens of billions of dollars a year. And to put it in perspective, the Palisades and the Eaton fires are likely to be the third most costly insured loss in the United States history, behind Hurricane Ian and Hurricane Katrina. So I think it's safe to say that the complexity of fire is generally outpacing our ability to implement the adaptations and the innovations that we need. And although we haven't seen the worst of it yet, I remain firmly convinced that this is a solvable problem, and geospatial intelligence can fundamentally change the way that we perceive, detect, understand, and respond to wildfires globally. So I want to start with the first question. Can we fight wildfires from space? So I really think that in the wake of recent events, that this question is both very urgent and it's also inspiring, but it's not the only question that we should be asking. On January 7th, much of Southern California was being impacted by Santa Ana winds in excess of 80 to 90 miles per hour. And keep in mind, this is in January. There's no longer a fire season, it's a fire year. At 10:30 a.m., the Palisades fire started in Pacific Palisades, followed 8 hours later by the Eaton fire on the opposite side of Los Angeles County in Altadena. Within hours, those two fires destroyed 16,000 structures, burned 37,000 acres, and killed 30 people. These two fires also exposed operational gaps in our intelligence programs. Within arguably one of the most advanced fire tech areas of the nation. This video is from the Fire Integrated Real-Time Intelligence System, or FIRIS. The FIRIS program is a joint program that is run with the California Office of Emergency Services and CAL FIRE. FIRIS staffs two fixed-wing King Air platforms, one in Northern California and one in Southern California. And these aircraft are equipped with mapping capabilities, sensors for IR, and the ability to downstream this information directly to firefighters on the ground. We also have over 1,100 ground-based cameras throughout California as part of our Alert California network, which are AI-enabled cameras that help us to very quickly detect fires throughout California. And although the state staffs two fixed-wing aircraft The video that I showed you previously was actually from the aircraft in Northern California, because the one that was based in Chino in Southern California wasn't able to fly due to the high winds. It wasn't able to take off out of Chino. Additionally, due to the operational constraints of that day and the flight time limitations, the aircraft that flew the Palisades fire was never able to get over to the Eaton fire until much, much later in that incident. So this left responders on the Eaton fire lacking critical intelligence. As the Eaton fire pushed into the built environment, where it destroyed 9,000 structures, which are the structures that you see here in red, first responders were relying on 911 calls, radio communications, and ground observation to try to stitch together an idea of what the fire was doing, what the perimeter of the fire was, the direction that it was going. This contrast, one fire with real-time intelligence and one without, exposed critical intelligence gaps. And we witnessed what a difference it makes when firefighters have access to actionable intelligence on the ground, and when firefighters who rely on this intelligence are operating in the blind. So what if we could close that gap? What if every fire across the globe, large or small, could be detected and transmitted to first responders? So this brings us to another question. It's critically important to note that while fast fire suppression and aggressive initial attack are incredibly important, we cannot respond our way out of this crisis. Believe it or not, if we put out every single fire, all we end up doing is kicking the can down the road and actually increasing risk over time. So there's this painful duality with fire. We actually need more of it. We just don't need it at the severity and at the intensity that we're currently experiencing it. So what if our firefighters had spatial or geointelligence available to better understand how an unplanned fire was going to burn within minutes of ignition? What if they had the intelligence to help inform whether they deploy an aggressive initial attack to that fire or deploy a beneficial fire suppression strategy to let fire reclaim its natural role in the ecosystem and actually drive down risk to communities? So these are the questions that I think can begin to be answered when we first give our responders the geospatial intelligence they need at rapid revisit rates. And this will allow firefighters to make a much more nuanced decision about their response strategy. So my sense is that we are on the cusp of really revolutionizing our thought process. And as we move into the next phase of how we think about and respond to fires, geospatial intelligence is going to play a critical role, not only for firefighters, but for all first responders that are dealing with an increasing scale and scope of these disasters, not only within the United States, but globally as well. So I just want to end with this. I wanted to thank each and every one of you for being part of that solution. We would not be where we are today if it wasn't for the work that you're doing here at GEOINT and with the geospatial intelligence systems that you all work with. So thank you so much. All right, so I'd like an opportunity for our panelists to introduce themselves, and I will go ahead and start with Brian Collins.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you all for being here, and I know we're at the morning session, so we all agreed to say controversial things, because no one's really here yet. You're all here, but this is our chance to really talk about disaster response, and I'll start with my challenge. And I think disaster response is a terrible term, because it implies you're just responding to things. And in fire, we have funny phrases in the fire community, one of which is, why plan when we respond so well? And I would argue we are not responding well, both from an emergency management perspective, because we are responding to fires and other natural disasters. But at the same time, our community needs to step forward and do more and present solutions directly to our emergency management, our response community, and even our planning and science communities so that we can take an active role in what is happening to our communities. The scale of impacts from hurricanes to tornadoes here, even in St. Louis, are different than they have been in the past. We have a different built environment. Our communities have grown. Our economies are different. And we need to take a proactive role. So, and that's what I like to do. And I think this organization, the Geospatial Intelligence Symposium and USGIF, have a history of this. And we want to keep extending that. So this is kind of an invite for you to grab us, grab Chris, and talk about this. So my name is Brian Collins. I'm the Executive Director of Earth Fire Alliance. But a lifelong GEOINTer, and I'll do a quick history for GEOINT, is in 2007, the response to the San Diego fire siege was planned at a GEOINT summit on the first night of the reception when Keith Mosbach and I were walking around, and I got a call from then State Fire Marshal Kate Dargan, who said, everything's coming to California, send someone out here to help us manage all the assets that are coming into California. So Keith and I met. I know Keith Barber was with us. We had a whole group. Kate Hall was with us. And I got to fly to California and try and manage all the assets that were being thrown at the state of California. And I can say that's great, but it highlighted why the organization I currently lead was created was what we got in California was everything that could be thrown at us. Nothing we got was designed to do what it needed to do. It was what we had available at the time. It was a disaster response. So Earth Fire Alliance, and I challenge all hazards to do the same thing, is an organization that was stood up to look at and decide and build the types of collections that are required for us to make better decisions on a fire before, during, and afterwards. A purpose-built system. So Earth Fire Alliance is a nonprofit. It is funded by philanthropic organizations, and it is a combination of us and partners, Muon Space, to build a purpose-built system that will address the fire problem. That doesn't mean it's a silo, but it means we don't just take what we need, we actually state what we need. And so what we need to be able to see, in the challenge you presented, Chris, is to be able to see fires that start small. We need to see low-intensity fires. We don't want to wait for them to be big. And we want to see what they do on the landscape so that we can determine, is it a positive or negative outcome that is going to happen from that fire? Do I move resources? Do I manage the fire? The reason for that is, if we do this, if we create the right kind of data, we can enable new decisions and strategies. We don't just fight last year's battle. We create a new paradigm of how we make decisions. So that's for Earth Fire Alliance. That's where I come from, and that is the challenge of disaster support. Is we need to change that mantra to how do we help make better strategic decisions before something even happens. So thanks for being here, and thanks for the great tee up of the challenges facing just wildfire, but they are similar challenges across all of the hazards that we encounter.
Good morning, Madison, Creeden. I'm with ICEYE US. So ICEYE focuses on three things. We have a SAR constellation, so we sell data. We also sell missions, and then most importantly for this conversation, we have a solutions team, which focuses on providing natural disaster support. I actually am relatively new to the GEOINT community. My background is with the military as a naval intelligence officer. But my last couple years, I served at NGA, working on a program where we were trying to incorporate commercial imagery along with our national sources to focus on our international intelligence priorities as well as natural disasters. And so I really fell in love with commercial space there, and it's just a pleasure to be a part of this.
Hi, and I'm Jonny Dyer. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Muon Space. We're working with Brian at EFA. And I think I wanted to start by saying I think we're living in kind of a really remarkable time from the perspective of space-based GEOINT, from a number of different dimensions. One is that we're seeing sort of unprecedented ability to deploy sensors in space in ways we never imagined before in terms of numbers and capability. And I think that's something that we're going to see really unlock entirely new ways of thinking about what can be done with intelligence from space. There's also things like AI that we're all talking a lot about and how that can be applied to these massive new data sets that we're going to be creating with all these new sensors. And so I think that things like the confluence of this incredible challenge we have in front of us with wildfire and the fact that we're living in this incredible time where we can imagine deploying purpose-built systems that can get very low latency data for real applications in the field it's a very exciting prospect. And I think that the wildfire sort of use case in specific is a very tangible and compelling thing for especially many of us that live in the West, but certainly more and more I think it's going to be globally. And we're just very excited to be able to contribute to making an impact on that problem.
Awesome. So as excited as I am to talk about wildfire, ultimately the technology can be used across all hazards, but I do want to ask you, Brian, so with the FireSat constellation coming online, can you tell us a little bit about at full operational capability, what that system is going to provide and how that's different than some of the other types of remote sensing mechanisms, whether ground or space that we currently have?
Sure, and the first thing I'll say is, great challenging question, because as a collection manager, the first thing I have to say is I can't choose one sensor over another. So even though Earth Fire Alliance, everybody sees us as deploying the FireSat constellation, which is a satellite low Earth orbiting constellation to detect and monitor fires. That everybody sees us as that, but our mission statement is transformative data. So it's not just satellites. So the first thing is, as a collection manager, and probably we all know, it's really important that we combine all the sensors we have to actually give an answer of what we're looking for. And different sensors make other sensors more effective. A space-based constellation gives us a unique capability to make ground systems and aircraft systems even more effective at what they have, because you can't just deploy a set of towers across the entire planet that are going to observe fires. You also can't fly airplanes all over the planet with the type of persistence we're looking for. It's just a resource-constrained problem. But a satellite, a low Earth orbiting satellite system that we're providing, can give us enough overwatch to appropriately place those sensors in the right place or combine them. For example, when you have a tower system, a lot what you see is an initial detection in the smoke. We learn a lot from that. We learn about where the winds are blowing. We know the types of fuels that are burning, because if a home that is on fire versus vegetation on fire produce different levels of smoke, that's amazing information, and it's persistent. A satellite system will be able to see on the other side of that hill. So if the fire is moving dynamically on the other side of the hill, a tower is not going to see that, and eventually it's going to be obscured by smoke. You can vector an aircraft around to the other side to actually track what's going on at a tactical level. So those are the important theses. But where did we come up with what we want to do? We spent about 4 years doing a study with a series of organizations, from Google Research to the Environmental Defense Fund to 200 fire and emergency managers across the planet, to find out how we would change a decision. And what we came up with is first finding small fires. So we need to be able to see a fire when there's a moment that you can have an interaction with that fire before it gets big. So that means small. If you wait too long, you cannot stop. This is my other challenging comment. I think firefighting is a tough term too, because on a large-scale wildfire, you do not stop a wildfire. You manage it, you know where the fire breaks are, you know where you can put control objectives, but you're fighting the fire is something you do when it's small and you can go direct attack. So we need to be able to see those. The next is we need to see small, low-intensity fires, and that's because fires are different across the planet. So a satellite, the FireSat constellation is designed to pick up a small fire, about the size of a classroom, at small intensity, so we can see a grass fire emerging in the plains. We can see the grass fires, for example, in the Texas Panhandle that became issues to our cattle industry. We can detect and see those fires in that environment. We can see fires under canopy because of the small amount of heat that's actually going to go through the canopy that we see in things like on the East Coast fires. We can also see those fires globally in the Amazon. So the first thing we had to see a small fire. Second thing is we have to see what the fire's doing. So the choices there is either you're out in GEO or you have a constellation of LEO satellites. GEO gives you tough picking up a small fire. So with a LEO constellation, our goal is 15-minute revisit across the planet. faster in areas like the United States in terms of latitude, so we can see the fire move, so we know where the fire is moving and where the most large impacts are coming up, so we can move resources. We can also then look inside the fire and understand the intensity of what's happening inside. So the constellation was designed with those specific things in mind, which was to look at decisions we can impact going forward. But again, in summary, again, as a good collection manager, say that system should complement other systems out. We are not in a competition of one sensor versus another. The problem's too big for that. We want to be able to layer those in, which will, I assume, come up to the final question, which is, we're giving you a great challenge, the GEOINT community, because your data is about to get, every year, Moore's Law is well surpassed in terms of data quantity. We are well past Moore's Law exponential growth of data for the GEOINT community to start processing. So that's going to be the challenge, is we're going to fix your collection problem, and now we're going to have a data processing problem.
Thank you. So, kind of jumping into more all hazards, emergencies, ICEYE is just doing such incredible work in this space. And I'm curious, Madison, how do SAR sensors complement traditional optical imagery for hazards like floods and hurricanes, and thinking more broadly?
Yeah, thank you. I think complement is the big word there. So EO satellites are really excellent for being able to detect very minute damage down to roof tile level, days or even weeks after an event. But often during an event or leading up to an event, there's too much wind, smoke, rain, and so you're not able to either fly aerial assets or use electro-optical imagery. And so that's where SAR is really able to shine. We also have the world's largest SAR constellation, and so that enables us to collect large amounts of imagery over areas of interest or over a flood, for example. Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton, we took over 250 images for both of those events. But that's not the whole story. We still need, we need to be able to capture the entire flood, but we also need to be able to capture the flood at its very peak. And so to do that, we have to use auxiliary sources. So we have to use handheld imagery that someone is able to take, or aerial imagery from a plane, from a NOAA plane, or electro-optical imagery. So it really takes the entire GEOINT community to be able to produce a good flood insight product.
Awesome, thank you. To you, Jonny. So I kind of have two questions for you. So Muon is building flexible platforms of scientific-grade sensors and small satellites. So the first question is, how does your mission as a service model enable quick deployment of constellations like FireSat? And could you walk us through how Muon can tailor the satellites to different hazards using common modular hardware and software for that?
Yeah, so kind of our thesis when we started the company was very much that a lot of this LEO satellite technology has matured to the point where we can build kind of a common platform that's very adaptable and tailorable to solving specific mission problems. So rather than the world that, in a lot of ways we've lived in, where we try and do a very complex bespoke system that collects one type of data and then hopefully use that for as many applications as possible. We believe the future is that we're deploying a large number of very mission-tailored sensors to space, and doing that, again, efficiently is critical. And we think the technology and sort of the platform approach to this is a different way to do that, where we can take a bunch of common pieces and then very rapidly adapt them through things like software and some modular hardware pieces to get the right thing for the mission, but also done at scale and quickly in things like large LEO constellations. I think what this unlocks, again, is sort of a mindset shift in terms of how we think about solving some of these problems. FireSat is a really good example of a place where there is existing satellites that are collecting data that the fire agencies use, some of our weather satellite systems, including some of the geosystems. But those systems were never actually really tailored to solve the wildfire problem. This is sort of exhaust data in some ways from systems that were designed for weather forecasting or other things. And when you take a step back and say, what is the thing you would really want to have a big impact on that particular problem, you come to a very different solution space that you'd like to go implement. Something that has, for instance, to Brian's point, the combination of both high enough resolution to see small fires, but also latency that looks a lot more like the geosystems that we're collecting weather with, so that you can get data at very high temporal cadence into the field and to the operators. And the only way to really solve that problem is by deploying a large number of LEO satellites with sensors that are very focused on that particular use case. And we think we're really entering a new world where things like the ability to deploy these things modularly and use common pieces, but then tailor them to a very specific application or mission is now upon us, and we can do that efficiently.
Thank you. So one of the things that I think about, Brian, is with Earth-Fire Alliance, it has this ethos of radical collaboration. And so certainly there's a lot of relationships and partnerships that are being built over time. I'm curious, what relationships or partnerships have been really critical to the development of what Earth-Fire Alliance is doing? And then also, how are you guys thinking about the data sharing across all these different government agencies across the globe?
Yeah, first part of that, to answer that question is, when you take something and say the ethos of your organization is radical collaboration, you have to remind yourself every day when you hunker down at your desk that you actually need to talk to other people, because when you solve hard problems, you often hunker down. So I love that one of our tenets of our organization is radical collaboration, and then there's times where I'm like, I've got to talk to somebody else again today, but then I realize that's the fun part. So but that is one part of the part of Earth-Fire Alliance that sort of keeps me up at night. Jonny and I were talking, is what happened last night, or that you thought of that woke you up in the middle of the night. And mine is our data adoption and our partnerships. Earth-Fire Alliance is a global organization. We're going to provide data globally. You can imagine that in this community, which is a land management, a fire response, an ecological community, and a science community, that's a pretty tough task to collaborate. So when you think of the partners, we have a series of partners that are the most important, at least that have emerged to us. The very first is we are an organization that is a public-private partnership. So we have support from philanthropic donors who have provided the resources for us to build and launch the satellites. We have a company, Muon Space, that is the engineering and the production and the operational workhorse to bring our ideas to life and put them out there. Then we have the user community, which for us is federal agencies, it's state agencies, it's science agencies, and bringing them together is something that we are focused on, and that's really our primary task. Again, everybody thinks we're a satellite organization. We're actually a community organization to bring those together. Bringing those together and understanding how they can effectively work together is our biggest challenge. We have a very large early adopter program. We have a satellite in orbit today, thanks to Muon Space, that is part of that to prepare that community to use the data. So we have a whole series of early adopters whose job is to get data early and give us feedback as fast as possible. Then we gradually move that out into our user community and the science community over the course of the next 2 years to really move it out there. And the reason for that is, as we go forward, the worst thing that can happen to us at EFA, I think, is what's our failure mode? Our failure mode is we launch these satellites. We're up today. We launch 3 more next year. We start the train of launching them, and it takes 2 years for the user community to be comfortable to use our data. That would mean we lost 2 years in our fight against both wildfires and other natural disasters, and in terms of community resilience. So our partners, our most important partners, are not, they originally were the funding partners. Now our partners are the user community. So that is federal agencies, and trying to use the federal agencies to help us understand a large-scale implementation of our data and to disseminate it, and the local agencies. One of our big points of our mission is we are not a communications organization, and we also don't fight fires. So we have the classic NGA model. We have a last tactical mile issue, which is getting that data to the decision maker and getting it out there. So our partnerships with decision makers are the most important part of our partnerships.
Awesome, and you just teed me up perfectly for my question to Madison. So ICEYE delivers near real-time flood extent and depth maps to first responders. So as an example, providing flood impact data to FEMA within hours of during hurricane season. So how do you achieve such fast turnaround from the raw satellite data to the actionable maps, and can this model extend to other hazards?
Yeah, thank you. So, we've been doing this for 5 years, and so it has taken a lot of iterations. But the first thing that the company realized they needed to focus on was getting ahead of the issues, getting ahead of these natural disasters. And in order to do that, we had to hire a team of specialists. So we have meteorologists, hydrologists, geospatial analysts on our team, on a 24/7 team, really, that monitor the whole world, for wildfires, for floods, for typhoons and hurricanes. And so they're critical to getting ahead of the problem. The second thing we have is a bunch of auxiliary specialists, and so they're the ones that are responsible for collecting all that additional information we need, whether it's another Sentinel image or handheld imagery or EO imagery. They geolocate that data, and then they combine it with the SAR imagery. And then our final team are these operational specialists who focus in GEOINT, and they bring all that information together, run it through our artificial intelligence models, and that is what produces the Flood Insight product. And so it's something that we've really improved over time, become more agile, more accurate, and that is something that we've really benefited from. For fire damage in particular, it's a little different. Our fire damage product is actually built off of our SAR imagery, which we run through a computer vision model that's been trained to detect damage within buildings. And so really the only latency there is the time it takes to be able to acquire imagery over the entire footprint of the fire. And so we're often able to deliver that within hours of the fire starting.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So Jonny, obviously, Brian and yourself have both touched on this partnership between Muon and Earth Fire Alliance. And I'm curious what you've learned from this co-development process with a lot of end-user input from firefighters and from the scientific community. And more broadly, how do you see this co-development and these public-private partnerships as a future model for tackling some of our biggest challenges that we have ahead of us?
Yeah, I love this question. So, I think, the first thing I would just say that we really learned in going through this over the last almost 4 years, as Brian mentioned, is surprise. I think that you often start down a path of solving a problem with a theory about what the solution looks like. And I think that as you go through this process of deeply interacting and understanding the problem, you get regularly surprised that the solution you thought was right may not actually be the right solution, and there's a lot of subtlety to what actually is needed to solve the problem. So I think from that perspective, it's an absolutely crucial process to have this sort of deep engagement across not only technology, not only agencies and science, but all the way down to the operator level to really understand what the problems on the ground are and how something like a GEOINT system can be brought to bear against those problems. So, for us, that was a very, instrumental kind of activity in terms of sort of getting to the ultimate design that we have now and that we're planning to deploy. And I'm hopeful that will mean that what we end up with is something that is truly impactful. So I think it's an extremely necessary component of this kind of process. And I think in terms of what it represents for the future, I think that there's an opportunity again now more and more to have these types of public-private partnership activities to take on and solve these problems that are not getting well solved in other places. And there can be many reasons they're not getting well solved, whether it's funding, whether it's stakeholder engagement, whether it's bureaucratic lines that are getting drawn in certain ways. And the really beautiful thing I think about, for instance, like Earth Fire Alliance is a very focused organization around let's just go help solve this problem, is it breaks down a lot of those barriers and it enables us to kind of work constructively in collaboration and very agilely in ways that traditional government procurement or even just pure private sector solutions I think really struggle to. And so I'm really excited that this is a great bellwether for the future and how we can address a lot of problems like this moving forward.
No, I really appreciate that answer. One of the things, so coming out of the fire community, is we had been responsible for kind of creating our own solutions for many, many years. And now we have this group of people coming into our space, bringing really meaningful solutions. And engaging the end user very early in the process, my opinion is actually results in much better outcomes down the road. but it's bringing two different cultures together as well to be able to solve these challenges. And I think we're going to be much, much better off by co-development of these different solutions together. So I have some cross-cutting questions for all of you, and I want to start with Madison, but Brian and Jonny, this is for you as well. So in your experiences, what's the biggest bottleneck in getting advanced GEOINT data converted into decision quality information on the front lines of an emergency? Is it a technology limitation? Is it a policy hurdle? Is it user adoption and training? And how can the GEOINT community work together to remove that bottleneck before the next disaster strikes?
Yeah, thank you. So I think from the ICEYE perspective, what we see the most is that it's a procurement hurdle. From us, I think that the GEOINT community could work together to try and encourage a more proactive response to natural disasters, whether it be floods or fires. What we often see is that agencies don't, they wait until these natural disasters have already occurred before they start the contracting process, and that slows down the amount of time that we're able to get them, those necessary flood insights or fire damage insights. And so another benefit of being able to, put a proactive model in place where you have those contracts already set so you're ready to respond when a disaster occurs would be that emergency responders can start incorporating that in their training so they're already familiar with how to use ICEYE data, with how to use the data that you were talking about. That's such a critical element to all of this is being able to plan in using the resources that you're going to use in a disaster.
Brian, Jonny?
Okay, I'll go. I think, I was just thinking back, so my background before Muon, I was early at a company called Skybox Imaging, where we were deploying high-resolution visible EO systems. And I think one of the biggest learnings I had at Skybox is, I originally thought that you take an image, and that's the hard part. Like, you get the image down to the ground, and somebody can look at it and do something with it. And having gone through that process and trying to figure out why people were not using imagery, et cetera, I think what I learned is that there's a lot of this geospatial data has a lot of complexity to it. It's got a lot of subtlety to it. As the GEOINT community knows well, there's a lot of expertise required to take data from a collection system and interpret in a way that's actually operationally useful. And a lot of the operators, they don't want to look at an image. They don't want to look at, what is the current geospatial projection I'm using and how does that map to where I am on the ground? What does this thing that I don't quite understand in the image mean? They really want something that's very actionable and simple because their job is to operate. It's not to spend time trying to understand what's in data. And so I think that is the biggest challenge. I think it is how you turn these data sets into something that, it's to Brian's point about the last mile or getting water to the end of the row, not only getting that data into the hands of operators, but getting it into a form that they can actually operate, they can make decisions, they can take action on without huge amounts of sophistication, without needing a PhD. And I don't think we've solved that problem. I'm hopeful that there's a lot of technology things that can be brought to bear against that problem, everything from AI to better IT and delivery systems. But I think that is really the crucial kind of bottleneck in terms of going from collecting these very, very powerful data sets in space or on the ground and actually making them useful or actionable to operators.
Barriers, and I'll end with a question for you.
All right.
So I think the biggest barrier that we're starting to see, and it's part of the challenge that you presented when you were talking about just the wildfire, but we'll talk all disaster response, again, we need a better term, as we look forward, is applying the data to the decisions that should be made. And so as a Marine, we always like to say we're making decisions at the speed of relevance. We don't need to make every decision now. We have to make the decision we need to make. And there's times where we have a lead space for other decisions. The changing way that incidents are occurring with us and impacting our communities are changing the speed with which a decision has to be made, whether it's a battalion chief, a first arriving captain, a city emergency manager, a city mayor. That decision is getting very complex. Add to it the complex decision of whether or not it's a good fire or bad fire. Add to it whether or not we're going to manage the interior of a fire or exterior. So today we don't manage interior fires. We fight the perimeters, and then we go back to the inside, right? But that inside has other effects that we're starting to realize. A persistent burn off inside of a fire perimeter produces smoke. That smoke can have bad effects on our community. So we're starting to add new things that our decision makers have to make. Matching our data that we're producing to the decision maker is the biggest barrier we are now facing. Because, and I'll challenge all of our emergency management community or all hazards community is, and the difference between that and other communities is, if you were presenting a GEOINT solution to the Department of Air Force, there is a doctrine, there is a structure, they know what they want, they tell you what they want, maybe wrong, but at least you have a moment of dialogue. With our emergency management community, we don't have that similar structure. And certainly to know what is the doctrine for how we address something, what are the needs that are already out there. If I have a technology solution or a piece of data, how do I insert it into that decision cycle? That's a challenge for us because we are starting to produce more and more data. And so that the question I have for you, Chris, is, my question is, the fire community is starting to get a lot of data solutions and starting to get a lot of technology solutions, and we're starting to identify, we're going to start flooding you. So we're presenting you a challenge of how do we apply that, and how do you, as a member of your community, help steer that into the appropriate solutions for those decisions that are happening on the ground.
Yeah, so the way that I think about that is, right now we don't necessarily have the structures in place to be able to do that. And I do look to our military partners as some of the frameworks that have been set up, and everything from like looking at the way the Defense Innovation Unit, AFWorks, Armory Futures Command, really creating an internal structure, because the fire service agencies were very fragmented across local, state, and federal agencies, which can make things much, much more complex for technologists that are bringing data and solutions into us. And so the way that I think about it is we need to centralize kind of how we think about innovation, and we need to set up the structures internally to be able to bring that in, not just on behalf of like a single organization like CAL FIRE or the Forest Service or an LA County Fire. We need to be really working much more broadly. At the federal level, we're seeing right now some legislation that will stand up a wildfire intelligence center. We have an Intel center in California. We need to start linking these intelligence centers together, especially if the federal government stands one up, which they really, really need to. We can start being much more efficient with the way that we bring this data in, and it makes it easier for the companies that are actually providing the data to us to have kind of more of a common platform that we're all working off of at the same time. So we have about 14 minutes left. I wanted to dive into some of the audience questions, if that's okay. And feel free to, any one of you, to answer these questions. So the first question is, how can community members facing wildfires gain or improve their access to using geospatial data to build community-driven prevention and mitigation efforts? And how can this offer improved granular solutions and offer support to first responder strategies?
It sounds like a tag team between you and me, since you did mention community wildfire protection plans, but also there's other parts to it, which is the data itself. So first, I'm going to promote another nonprofit. So for those who haven't used or seen the Watch Duty application, which is a unique idea, which was, there are many, and I know Gary's going to get mad because I'm going to use the term common operational picture. There are many common operational pictures out there. Often they're targeted towards the operational community, right? So it's basically for firefighters or for operators using something like ATAC out there. It's all very much towards the operators. And Watch Duty flipped that and said, what if there was a platform or a common picture for the public? And so that really changed the dynamic. In the past, when you wanted to see, well, if as a local community member, is there a fire near me? Hopefully your local news may actually have a web page for that. You may search around. I think San Francisco Chronicle has a great one. You sort of hunted around for that. And Watch Duty said, we're going to make a public application. We're going to give that data out. And so they created that, which interestingly enough, if you build it, they'll come. People like us say, that's awesome, because that will help us solve our last tactical mile to the public. How do we warn the public and get the data out? Something like that, that's a publicly accessible tool. Google Maps now integrates fire data within their Google Maps for routing of information. So we're starting to see the public awareness really open up. So that number one is data providers having the ability and the desire to provide that data to these various platforms through an open API, so we don't have to chase them, but certainly an easy thing for us to do as a nonprofit. It becomes a little bit harder when you have a company that's attempting trying to create a business out of that, but there are going to be solutions in public-private partnerships to do that. So the very first thing is just public warning. The second is the data for planning purposes has to be related to the decisions someone's doing in their community. So again, I'll go back to big fires versus small fires. If all we're doing is picking out the really big disaster fire before it happens, it's not going to help your community plan. I think of hurricane models, my vision of the future. Wildfire is very much like, in the future, should be very much like what we do. I'm from the Gulf Coast. You turn on the TV, you see hurricanes forming. They're from satellites. You see the data. There's a science person isn't telling you. It's your local meteorologist says, here's the hurricane is, here's the projection model, it's moving here. So while your emergency responders are working their plans to make you safe as an individual, you also have the ability to process that by watching TV and making a decision. So why don't we do this with wildfires? Why do we not see wildfires in their incipient stages? Why do we not see how they move across the landscape so that we can make informed decisions prior to getting a reverse 911 call and we receive that? So I think part of it is data, and part of it is acknowledging that we now have a role to provide that data out to our communities, not just through the mouthpiece of a responding organization, but directly to them in a format that they can use and understand on themselves.
And I'm curious, Madison, also, not just from like a wildfire standpoint, but how does the geospatial data that you work with, how do you think about that as informing community-driven prevention and mitigation efforts for things like floods or hurricanes?
Yeah, so our flood insights really they're easy to ingest geospatial files. So in that sense, we've cracked that nut of being able to get this information out and displayed in any GIS platform that's available, whether that's the FEMA Tempo app or the Juvari Web EOC. To my point before about being proactive, if we're able to get agencies, federal agencies, state and local agencies, to start thinking about how do we plan for these disasters before they happen, then they can start to incorporate the lessons learned from each of the former floods or fires within those regions, and use that for better community planning.
That's awesome. I have lots of questions here. So here's one, and this is a question that I have as well. This is a great question. So how is FireSat different than existing satellites that can provide data for fire operators like FireGuard or VEERS and GOES? Like, how is this different from other?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So, it depends a little bit on what you're comparing to, but today, there's kind of two primary challenges with existing, there's three primary challenges with existing satellite systems. So one is temporal resolution, one is sort of spatial resolution and sensitivity, and the third is access to data, I would say, or distribution of data. And so the weather systems, VEERS is a weather system, GOES is a weather system, they're not really right for fire on the temporal spatial scale. So the geosynchronous systems are very high cadence temporal, usually something like 5 minutes, but the resolution is order of a kilometer. So you're only going to see something at sort of a kilometer scale out of those systems. And then the low Earth orbiting system like VEERS is higher resolution, still not nearly as high as FireSat, but at best you're getting an update about every 12 hours from VEERS. So from a temporal perspective, it's very deficient. So with FireSat will be a 50-meter resolution, native resolution in the sensor, which allows us to see a sub-pixel fire as small as 5 by 5 meters. And then again, when we get to the constellation, that'll be a 15-minute global revisit. So it has temporal cadence that's similar to the geosynchronous systems at a resolution and sensitivity that's almost an order of magnitude better than the current low Earth orbiting systems. The third part, FireGuard was brought up, and FireGuard's a fantastic program. FireGuard leverages classified national assets, And there's a lot of constraints around how that data can be distributed and used. It's a fantastic program. We think we're very complementary to that over time. And even then, like as impactful as FireGuard has been, as you know, I mean, Chris, you worked with this system, so there's a lot of needs beyond that it's not fully fulfilling. So I think that's a way to think about it.
I can remember the first time I got FireGuard data going to an incident back in like 2018. It was in a form of a PDF that was sent to me, and I was responding to a fire that was going to take me about an hour to get there. But to actually be able to see the perimeter of where the fire was, and then also have some community level data in terms of what the potential threat was of that fire was really game changing for me, because it helped me really think differently about what that response was going to look like. And that was my first touch point ever with geospatial information. So it was really profound, and I will never forget it. So I'm going to ask this question because it has nothing to do with geospatial intelligence. To what extent can building codes mitigate these problems? Florida did this after Andrew in 1992. Now the hurricane risk is more flood than wind. And I'm happy to answer this one unless...
Go for it.
So the reason I love this question is because like what I mentioned in my opening comments is this problem is solvable, right? And so when it comes to wildfire or any natural disaster, we're learning a lot through the Insurance Institute of Business and Home Safety about what kinds of construction techniques are actually going to prepare our built environment for whether it's a flood or a fire or a hurricane. And so with home hardening, we've never had such a conversation about home hardening before than we're having right now, primarily because of the destruction that occurred in Los Angeles. But we know what it takes to prepare a home in advance and the defensible space that's needed prior to a fire striking a community, which will dramatically drive down the risk. And so I think building codes play a huge role in it. And I'll even go on record saying that if we don't think about how we rebuild these communities that have been impacted by urban fire, by wildfire now, and we don't build them to a resilient standard, we're just setting ourselves up for another disaster later on. So let's take this opportunity to make these communities that are being impacted by fire resilient now, so then we can focus our resources on those communities that are not. So great question. I don't know if anyone wants to add to that one at all. Next question. Is solving the problem of fire with geospatial technology the only approach given the increased human population and development in area with a high probability of fire? So are there other approaches to geospatial intelligence other than to solving the wildfire problem?
Well, I think you, in your opening remarks, talked a little bit about it's more than just a technology problem. It involves technology. That's just one of our tools. But there's a policy issue. We need to set policies in terms of even just how we respond, again, and prepare. Mitigation is really, when you think about the mitigation issue, that's a policy, resource, and focus issue, which is back to the, why plan when we respond so well? And whatever financial model you look at, $1 of mitigation offsets multiple dollars of response, right? If you can do something in advance. But I would challenge us to say, the solutions may be policy, they may be land management, they may be building codes. All of these things are really important to us. All of those can be informed by GEOINT, because all of those in today's world, we make decisions based on data. We make decisions based on an analysis of what we're going to do, and what we need, the community needs to look at, and part of the challenge of Firesat is we're going to create all this data, is a very concerted effort to look through that data and begin analyzing the questions that specific question. We know how when we collect this data through Firesat, when you're collecting the data on floods as they form real time and move across the landscape, we will enable the community to ask really detailed question, which is, what is the pathway that hazard got to a value, about an asset of value? Was that once it got there, what was the impact on that asset of value? Then we can go back and say the solution to that question is a policy solution, a building code solution, anything. So the GEOINT analysis community and quite frankly, the need for artificial intelligence and machine learning to help us look through all this data is going to increase, because I think, and I think is not a course of action, but I think we are going to present data that we have not had before, which will allow us to make these very complex decisions and answer a really tough question, which is, can we just use building codes to solve this problem? Should we change our approach to where we build homes? Well, let's face it, that's really hard, right? We love where we build our homes. We love these California canyons. I'm in Colorado. I love having trees outside of my house. I don't want to live in a moonscaped world. So we have to start looking at, well, how can I exist in that wildfire environment we have by understanding the movement of fire into my area and what is happening in my area and its impact. If we do that, we can actually enable these other decisions.
So we have a minute and a half left, and we didn't get through all of the questions, but what I was going to say, feel free to approach any one of us if you would like us to still answer your question, be happy to do that. And I would just like to say on behalf of this amazing panel that we had this morning, thank you so much. And thank you so much to all of you for taking your time to talk about how geospatial intelligence actually will make a significant difference in the way that we perceive, detect, and respond to these natural disasters. And ultimately, it will save life and property and have much better outcomes to our ecosystems as well. So thank you so much, and I hope you all have a wonderful day today.
Thanks, Chris.